Greetings once again to all of my subscribers, followers, and listeners out there. Welcome to the 113th episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show. I am your host, Mark Hasara, and for over 60 years, my passion has been everything aviation. As you can see around me here, I'm an airplane nerd, and I love it. On the Lessons from the Cockpit show, we debrief some of the most fascinating and intriguing pilots, air crews, maintainers, and aviation enthusiasts from all over the world. We want to hear their stories, but more importantly, what did they learn from being in these intense and extraordinary military, commercial, and even general aviation environments? The purpose of the Lessons from the Cockpit show is to illustrate how does the aviation world work, but more importantly, increase critical thinking skills both in the air and on the ground. Many of the stories that you hear on the Lessons from the Cockpit show are being told for the very first time. Today is one of those days. We have my good friend TAZZ back on. This episode of the Lessons from the Cockpit show is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. We have 158 ready to print 4, 6, and 8 foot vinyl decals that you can peel off and stick to your walls like the 8874, my tanker when I was stationed at Kadena. We also do custom work. If there's an airplane that you absolutely love and want it on your wall with your name on it, weapons load, a particular unit or tail number, chances are we've probably already got it done. Or just look through the 158 ready to print and see if there's one you like. But that's how we keep the show going. This show is also being sponsored by Valorous TV, the home for heroes. This is where you can go see great movies, films, interviews with military, law enforcement, and first responders. Folks, this is a great channel to go to. On YouTube, go look at Valorous TV. Today, my good friend TAZZ, Joe Katuzeinski, is back. He was one of the strategists for the surge and also was a Operational Support Squadron Commander there in Baghdad and has a lot of really cool background information on how we ran the air campaign during the surge. So grab an adult beverage of your choice, sit down, strap in, and let's begin the Lessons from the Cockpit show with my good friend TAZZ. He and I go back a ways, 1994. My good brother TAZZ, Joe Katuzeinski, welcome back to the Lessons from the Cockpit show, brother.
Thanks, Logo. Thanks for having me on. It's great to be here. Appreciate it.
It's great to have you back on. And boy, you and I go back a few minutes, don't we?
Yeah. 30 plus years.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. Back in the 90s at Kadena, man.
Yeah, that's
right. After Desert Storm. Anyway, tell everybody a little quick bio. What you doing?
A little quick bio. Yeah. 24 years Air Force, retired. Flew for the U.S. Navy under contract after that for 7 years. And now I'm with United Airlines as a captain. Right now, been with United now about 6.5, almost 7 years. And it's been a really good, really great experience for me to be here. But that's my bio. I was a fighter pilot in the Air Force, first Gulf War veteran. We call it Desert Storm, but a lot of people think of it as the first Gulf War. That was back in 1990, right? In August, when Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait, the U.S. military brought forces into theater. In August of that year, 1 week after the invasion of Kuwait, we were on the ground in Saudi Arabia with our F-15s. We deployed back in March. The war started in January of 1991, and we returned back in March after the war was over. And there's been a lot of military activity in the Middle East with the U.S. military since then. And we all know about, you and I know about Operation Southern Watch, but we had forces deployed in theater to protect our allies and help defend their interests in the region ever since then. So we all know about Gulf War II. That was in 2003. After the 9/11 attacks in 2001, we redeployed back to the Middle East and spent 20 years in Afghanistan and Iraq. And now the latest attack, the global strike using B-2s to take out the nuclear capability of Iran. That's where we're at right now. So that's my that's my military experience. Now with United Airlines, it's been a great time. I'm enjoying it. I'm really, it is a great way for me to personally see the country that I served all these years. And from a pilot's perspective, flew all throughout the COVID pandemic in 2020, watched the cities. United Airlines, we go into all the major hubs, all the major cities, Chicago, LA, New York, San Francisco, Denver. Those are our major hubs for the airline. And it's been a really a privilege to serve as a captain on United Airlines over the country that I've served all those years. So that's kind of where I stand right now. And it's been great. And thanks for having me on your show, Sluggo. I was looking forward to this.
I appreciate that, man.
And I think I was one of your first guests back 5 years ago, right?
Yeah, you were. Several years ago, I had you on.
Yeah.
And,
we talked right after Putin invaded Ukraine.
Yeah, we did.
Yeah,
we sure
we
did.
weren't so sure if the invasion was going to happen at the time, but he went for it. And I was a first officer at the time, and my captain, who I flew with, his mother-in-law was living in Ukraine at the time. And I think when we had that podcast with you, I mentioned the fact that he was able to get his mother-in-law safely out of Ukraine, get her through Poland, and through Poland, the U.S. Embassy there brought her to the United States, and she was able to leave the country. So he was very, very happy to get his mother-in-law back. Because when I was flying with him, on United Airlines at the time, we talked about Putin in Ukraine, and what he thought was he didn't think Putin was going to invade Ukraine. He thought it was just a bluff, because in his mind, Putin already grabbed some regions of Ukraine that were rich in minerals. The Crimea is the one that I'm thinking of, and that's what he mentioned. The Crimea is an area in Ukraine that was of strategic importance to Putin at the time. He got that several years ago. So we were talking. He thought it was a bluff, and when we had the podcast with you, Slugger, that was 2 or 3 weeks later. Yeah. That's when the invasion happened, and he was able to get his mother-in-law back. But so that some of the things you see flying for a major airline, you touch all these points across the country. You touch people's lives in ways that I didn't expect. But it's been a really great experience for me to be serving people in that role.
Hey, so I got a question for you.
Yeah, go for it.
What did you love about flying F-15s?
What did I love about it?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. You come up with some good stuff, Sluggo. Well, I felt really, it was a lot of hard work to get to that level. I really couldn't believe that I was selected to go fly an Eagle. I'm sure a lot of fighter pilots probably felt the same way. You as a kid, you dream of doing certain things in life. I always wanted to be a fighter pilot, and I was fortunate enough to be, selected to fly that airplane when I graduated from pilot training at Shepherd Air Force Base. This was back in the year 1988 when I graduated from pilot training.
You went through Euro-NATO school?
Yep, the Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training Program. That still is ongoing at Shepherd Air Force Base.
Oh, absolutely. Great program.
Yeah, but flying the Eagle was, at first it was very intimidating, because in the Air Force, when you start flying, we flew T-37s, which are pretty much a Cessna with a jet engine on it, very small, right? A Cessna airplane with a jet. But for me, I thought, man, this is great. This thing could go 200 knots. This is awesome. Then you go to a T-38, which is a small airplane. The gross weight of the airplane is 12,500 pounds.
Yeah.
And it's small. You have to fit into the cockpit. So you're used to these jets being small, right? Then when you get into the F-15, there's this ladder that you have to climb up, get into the cockpit. I felt like I was climbing up on the roof of my garage at home with a ladder. It was big. It was intimidating. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is unbelievable. I can't believe I'm here. It was very intimidating at first. But you go through the training, and the training is tough. It's hard. Going through pilot training and going through the F-15 transition training at the time. But once all was said and done, and you're a fighter pilot, and here you are with live weapons on your aircraft flying in the Middle East in the middle of a war, it really is an honor. It was an honor for me to do that. I still can't believe I was fortunate enough to get to that point. It was really a great experience, and I met some really, really awesome people along the way. People who are willing to serve their country in ways that very few people, unless you've been in the military, you really don't appreciate that or really understand it. You look at airplanes and you think of the airplane that's flying, but when a fighter pilot flies in formation with the brothers and sisters in his squadron, you don't look at an airplane and think that's just an F-15. No, that's Combo, or that's Gunga flying that airplane, or that's Stuff.
Yeah.
And the airplane flies and takes on the personality of the fighter pilot who's flying it in a way that you don't really see it unless you're in that squadron environment. And some of the finest fighter pilots I've flown with it wasn't an F-15. I'm not flying off the wing of an F-15. That's Stuff Smith that I'm flying with. That guy he's just a great individual, a great man, and an exceptional pilot. So that's what it felt like flying an Eagle. I did it. I got 2,300 hours in an airplane, flew it for just not quite 20 years, but for the most part of my career. I've been in 4 different operational fighter squadrons in the Pacific and in the U.S. And it's been just a privilege to do that. And I'm glad I did it. It gave me an experience that, I'll never forget.
Oh,
that's
yeah.
for sure. Yeah. But it is an airplane that responds so quickly. In the airline world, you put a control input into the yoke to turn. In the airplane, it lags a little bit, but it'll eventually start turning, right? But in a F-15, a fighter, you put a control input and that airplane almost responds with your thoughts. You can roll quickly, you can pull G's, and on a moment's notice, it gives you so much capability. It's impressive, So, but that's what it was like. It was hard work to keep on top of that. The F-15, you have to work really hard. It's a full-time job. You can't just be a minimalist and think, well, what's the least I could do to get the most performance out of this airplane? No, you give it your all. Employing the airplane as a weapon was a challenge in itself, and it was a full-time job. You had to dedicate a lot of your hours every day. 12 to 14-hour days were the norm back then. This was not a part-time job, and it took that level of effort to get to a point where you can employ that weapon, that the airplane is now a weapon with confidence. But from a pilot's perspective, I mentioned how quick it responded in the maneuverability. From a pilot's perspective, you didn't even really think about flying the airplane. The airplane was that good. It was so easy to fly once you got to a level of proficiency where you can employ the airplane and fly it where it needed to go. You really didn't think about flying the airplane. You thought about what you were doing with the airplane. Where are you looking with the radar? Where are you going to acquire a radar lock at what range? Am I in weapons parameters? Will I get a valid shot off the rail if I, squeeze the trigger now? You think about those things and what's going on outside the airplane. You don't worry about flying the airplane. In the airline world, it's a little different. Well, it's a lot different. You really worry about flying the airplane and bringing these 737s in at 155 knots indicated on a gusty wind day in Denver. It takes a lot of concentration and a lot of effort. I never thought about that flying the Eagle. Shooting a precision instrument approach down to 200 feet above the ground in foggy weather. It was easy. The airplane was that good, so easy to fly. But in the airline world, it's a challenge to bring 160,000 pounds of weight behind you, coming out over the fence and landing with precision. We do it all the time, but it really does take a lot of effort to fly the airplane well and do it well. It wasn't like that in the Eagle. It took more effort to employ the airplane as a weapon, getting ordnance on target, putting the radar where it needs to be to look for something. That's where all the effort and the brain cells were. It wasn't so much in flying the airplane, the dynamics of landing and taking off. I mean, that was I don't know if we were that proficient, but the airplane was so easy to fly. Now it's more challenging to fly, especially a Learjet. You really have to be on your game when you fly Learjets in turbulent weather. Um, but the airline world is different, and it's different in a good way because you have passengers now. You can't pull 9 Gs in an airliner. You have to be smooth and deliberate and positive in all your decisions you make.
Don't spill the coffee.
Yeah, it's but it is it's a lot of fun being a pilot. I can't tell you, yesterday we flew from Chicago. I'm on a trip with my airline right now. We flew from Chicago to uh, Calgary, Canada. So I'm in Alberta, Canada right now. It was about a 3 hour trip. We took off right at sunset, Sluggo. And if you know how the Earth rotates, and the sun sets in the
Yeah.
west, so we took off into the sun, literally into the sunset when we broke ground in Chicago and took off and started heading west. You can see the sunset out on the horizon. We kept the sunset lasted the whole time. It lasted 3 hours because we flew west. So it was a never-ending sunset, and but you can see all of creation. It was pretty cool.
Oh,
One
it's
thing
mind
I
blowing.
saw, well, one thing I did see was all the oil fields in North Dakota. It was
Oh,
twilight. It
yeah.
was, yeah, civil
Yeah.
twilight, and
Yeah.
all these oil fields burn off some excess gas. So there's flames that come out of the top.
Yeah.
When you drive down the interstate, you know what I'm talking about, right?
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Seen it
There were
many
hundreds.
times,
Yeah,
hundreds of
there were
them.
hundreds of oil wells at 32,000 feet. You look and you have a perspective on the world that few people see unless you're a pilot. But the oil wells were cooking. There were hundreds, literally hundreds of these oil wells in the Dakotas when we flew overhead. So you see all that when you're a pilot. And we landed in Calgary, and I blocked in 1 minute early, so I made my schedule. So I fulfilled my obligation. But it was when I say block in, that means you taxi up to the gate.
Yeah.
When you get to your arrival gate, you set the parking brake, and the jet bridge comes, and the passengers can get off. That's what we mean when we say block in. We set the
Yeah.
parking brake, and the sortie or the flight is done for that evening. So,
Yeah.
but that's what I did last night, and I'll keep doing it until they want me to retire.
Well,
And
and it's like you say, Taz, you see things that most human beings never see. I had a
yeah.
flight from Okinawa up to Eielson. All right. We took off at about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. We got over the top of Tokyo at civil twilight. Okay. So you've got the sun going down, but you got the lights of Tokyo underneath you. Then we got
Mm-hmm.
up to Kamchatka Peninsula and the Aurora Borealis came out. Okay. And of course you're just sitting in the cockpit going, you know, at this spectacle in front of you. And then we got to the Aleutian chain and the sun was coming up on the other side of the world. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We had a 140 knot tailwind. We were too heavy to land.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to just dump the gas. Okay. And I said, hey, Anchorage Center, too heavy to land. Can we do some laps around Mount McKinley? They said, yeah, sure. VFR direct Mount McKinley, go do it. Okay. So I put the gear down. We're at 25,000 feet. Well, it's a 28,000 foot mountain. So you're still looking out the cockpit, looking up at the freaking mountain. And we come into land in Eielson, and I have to stop taxiing at Eielson because a moose cow and her two calves are walking across the taxiway.
Yeah.
How often do you see that in one flight? It was just amazing.
Yeah.
And like you
Yeah.
said, man, pilots have a very different perspective on the world because of the things that we see, hear, feel when we're doing this,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know. Of course,
Yeah. Yeah.
one other thing about the F-15, you had those monster motors in it. Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
I remember my first flight with Haas Kindred, and we were two bags, like we always were at Kadena, two external tanks and everything like that. And we were off in what, like 2,500 feet. And I just remember being pasted in the seat when he went to full burner. I mean, again, I tell people flying, you really do use your five senses. Okay. People go, really smell? I go, oh yeah, yeah. when there's electrical fire, you're smelling it, things like that. But, you really do use all five of your senses when you're flying. And it's the most amazing thing when you feel it, like you said.
Hmm. Yeah, I think flying also is good for your soul, and your
Yeah.
body, because you have to use all your mental and physical
Yeah.
faculties to do it safely and
Yeah.
efficiently. There's art and science behind. It sounds kind of corny, but there's art and science behind everything we do. And to get an airplane to the destination on time, you have to consider all these different variables. Where am I going? What's the best route to minimize turbulence along the way? You can make those decisions and call the dispatcher who plans your flight with you um, to avoid some of those areas and be as efficient as possible. But we have an obligation as airline pilots to get our passengers safely and efficiently to their destination, with safety being the number one priority, and maximizing their comfort.
Yeah.
Right. So we can't throw the gear down and make a lot of noise like what you just did. We just can't do that. We have to be smooth and very reflect a
Yeah.
lot of, well, we have to be professionals because
Yeah.
they really do. They entrust our lives to us,
Yeah.
when they get on board. So I take that obligation very seriously. And I know a lot of my brother and sister airline pilots do that. And it's a profession that I think many aspire to, but few are chosen, just because it's a very difficult and hard road to get there. Yeah, you
Yeah.
just can't say, "Well, I want to fly airplanes," and then you go fly airplanes. You have to really prepare yourself mentally and physically for it. The people who do get hired, I have to admit, I'm flying with some of the best pilots I've ever seen. Today. When I was in the right seat as a first officer, the captains were really good. They really knew what they were doing. They were professionals, and I was proud to fly with these individuals. And it's the same now. I'm flying with first officers that just amaze me with the way they think and the way they fly airplanes. Their dedication to ensuring we can operate things and doing it safely. That's the art and science behind it. But the history that we see as airline pilots now, I didn't see this so much when I was flying in the military, because we were involved in a different type of mission. But now you spend a lot of time in the airline world at altitude. You're at cruise altitude. So what do you talk about for 5 or 6 hours? What are some of the things you think pilots talk about? Do you think we talk about altitude and airspeed and fuel flows and ground speed and things like that? No, we talk a lot about things that kind of come from the heart. We talk about some of the oil wells that I mentioned earlier. Why are those oil wells there? Why North Dakota? What's going on there? When we land in other countries, like when we land in Trinidad and Tobago, which is north, for some of the viewers, Trinidad and Tobago is just north of Venezuela. Venezuela is in South America, and there's a lot of oil. It's a very rich area of the world for oil. So as an airline pilot, when you break out of the weather, you get below the overcast and you look out at the Caribbean Sea, the ocean, and you see these big oil derricks floating around in that part of the world. It really reminds you of what's really going on. So you see all these changes as airline pilots. You really experience it from that perspective, but also from a personal perspective. You see things and hear things and experience things that I think very few people do, because we touch so many people's lives every year. For example, as an airline pilot, I fly about 75 to 80,000 passengers every year to a destination somewhere. It can be a long flight to an international destination, or it could be just a short hop from Cleveland to Washington, D.C., Cleveland, Ohio to Washington, D.C., or Cleveland to Chicago, whatever. But there's people on board, and everyone has a story, and there's some pretty touching moments when you interact with some of these passengers. I've had everyone from seasoned, experienced, retired Boeing engineers recommend that I read a 747 book that was written 20 or 30 years ago about the Boeing 747. This guy was in his mid 80s, and he said, "Captain," as he was leaving the aircraft in San Francisco, he looks at me and goes, "Captain, you really if you like reading about airplanes, I think he can sense that I kind of enjoyed my job.
Yeah.
But he says you need to read and get this book about the 747. It was one of the iconic aircraft of our day.
Oh,
right?
absolutely. Absolutely.
So I did. I went out and I got it on Kindle, and he was right. But you see that, and then last summer on July 3rd, about a year ago, this was a heartbreaking moment. We were going from, it was a short flight. We were flying from Dallas, Texas to Houston. And one of the flight attendants came up and she was crying. I said, "What's going on?" And she said, "You're not going to believe this. I don't know if I can do this flight." I said, "Well, what's happening?" She said, "Well, there's 4 young children in the back, ages from like 17 to 12 or 9 years old, something like that. These 4 kids are sitting next to each other and they're going to their parents' funeral in Houston." Yeah. And so what happened? Well, the parents were shot by some criminals or whatever. Don't know the details, but we were bringing them to their parents' funeral, So you see those things as an airline pilot, and you just have to, get them there safely, do the best you can. But there's moments that really can touch you in ways that, I didn't expect that. I didn't get trained for that. We don't go to a psychologist when we go through our Boeing 737 type rating in the simulator. We focus on the safety and the efficiency operations and ensure that we can comply with the standard operating procedures that the company produces to keep us all safe. And those, we call them SOPs, standard operating procedures. That is really the way the airline industry has evolved over the years and become really the safest means to travel today. And it really is. I'm not just saying that out of emotion. The airline industry, the international and domestic, when I say domestic, I mean U.S., United States only flights. It's the safest way to get from point A to point B. You have a higher risk of being killed on the interstate highway driving than you do flying an airliner. So, and that's really a cool thing. It's a great capability we have as a country to go from point A to point B. Would you want to drive my Volkswagen, or would you rather fly in a 777 to wherever we want to go? We have those choices, and I'm glad for that. And to be a part of that is for me as a pilot. That's really, it's a very cool thing, very rewarding. So those are my big thoughts on where we're at today.
Excellent.
I know you want to ask me some other questions about stuff.
So let's move to Iraq and the time frame where you were the strategist there. Okay.
Yeah.
And first of all, tell us about the strategy during that time period, because this is when if I'm not mistaken, the surge was going on, and we were going after a lot of folks, a lot of bad guys. And you were like right in the thick of it with Chowder, great American.
Yeah. My boss, Gary Crowder. Yeah. Retired Air Force Colonel. Yeah. You got to have him on your show as a guest. Yeah. He's a wealth of Air Force history. He is a wealth of information, and he's just, I can't say enough good things about him. He's that good. But yeah, the surge in Iraq, that was in 2007. When you read, there's a lot of work that's been done, that's been captured in book form. So you can read the history of what was going on there. But from a big picture standpoint, the war in Iraq, I got there in May or June of 2007. That's when the so-called surge was going on. What that means is the U.S. military was we were bogged down by a strategy that was more of a let's see if we can wear the enemy down and they'll give up the fight and then we'll call victory, right? So you were there when this shock and awe campaign took place in the year 2003, when the U.S. military first went into Iraq. George W. Bush was the president, and the decision was made to go into Iraq, invade Iraq. So that was in 2003. Well, from 2003 to 2007, under General Casey, a U.S. Army 4-star, who was the 4-star of Multinational Force Iraq. That was the name of the military command that was in place. So Multinational Force Iraq, 4-star command, located in the embassy area, what we call the green zone of Baghdad. That's where General Casey was, right? So he was with the political leaders at the time, and he was the 4-star Multinational Force Iraq commander. Now, there was also another organization in the military. As a strategist, you have to know all this. That's why I'm getting into it. I don't want to get into the weeds in too many details, but for the listeners, in order to understand the context of the situation at the time, you really have to understand the big global dynamics that were happening, right? So we invaded Iraq in 2003. We were there for 4 years, and we didn't really progress from a standpoint of setting the conditions in Iraq where we can leave, right? It was still a very violent nation. The nation was still at war with us and our allies at the time. Multinational Force Iraq was a coalition of military forces that we've never seen before in our history. This was a very unique time in history. After 2003, when Multinational Force Iraq was the coalition who General Casey was the commander, right? He was the Multinational Force Iraq commander. We had countries from former Eastern Bloc nations like Poland, Ukraine, Georgia, Lithuania, all these Eastern Bloc nations, Czechoslovakia, those were our allies in Iraq. Of course, the Brits were there. I know the British were there for sure. They're with us everywhere. But this was a very unique coalition of military forces. So we had these former Eastern Bloc countries with us in the fight in Iraq. So this lasted from 2003 till 2007, when our leadership in Washington said, you know, we can't keep doing this. We have to surge our military capability to set the conditions where we can eventually leave Iraq. So that was the strategic perspective. As a strategist, you have to know these things. You have to understand them. Colonel Crowder, you mentioned him earlier. He really understood the dynamics of what was going on. He really did. And he had a sense of air power history that I've never seen or heard anyone, at least in my life, express it in the way he did. So in 2007, when the surge was happening, for the listeners, you need to know that I was in Iraq from 2005 to 2006 on the ground at the Baghdad International Airport as the Operations Support Squadron Commander, which in Air Force terms, you're the guy who runs the airfield, right? There's an airfield there. There's a military airfield and a civilian airfield at Baghdad International Airport. The military was on one side. It's a big airport. We were on one side of the airfield, and the civilians had the civilian terminal. So I was there. I volunteered to go do that from 2005 to 2006. So I was on the ground during that. This was prior to the surge. This was in 05 to 06. So after going through an experience like that, we lost a lot of soldiers, Slogo. We lost a lot of soldiers and Marines. In my time there, upwards of 350 Americans were killed on my watch when I was running the airfield there. We weren't out fighting the battles. That war consisted of, at that time, under General Casey, we would stay on our operating bases, us being at the Baghdad International Airport. We would take incoming rounds during the day, enemy fire, either rockets or mortars. And we'd go out with a helicopter assault almost every night to go get the bad guys that just fired that round of incoming, That was the fight. We'd go out, do a helicopter assault at night, come home, eat our food, go back to our base, eat our food in the dining facilities or the chow halls, and wait for more incoming rounds. Another helicopter assault the next night. And this went on for months. All right. We did a lot at the airport. That's a whole nother conversation. I know you want to talk about the surge, but after going through an experience like that, I said to myself, when the surge was announced, I volunteered to go back. I wanted to make it back there, thinking I could bring some experience into the theater. I wanted to be a part of that. Right. So I volunteered to go back. So in June of 07, that's when I got there. The surge started earlier in the year. What it meant was the U.S. military plussed up the number. They increased the number of forces in theater. I think we went from 10 brigade combat teams to 20. I can't remember the exact number, but we plussed up the number of U.S. Army brigade combat teams in theater to give us more military capability, so we could go out and clear out areas, wide areas of the country. What does that mean, clear out? You take over you go through places and you clean out the bad guys from surrounding areas in Baghdad and throughout the country. That's what the surge was. There was a change in command at the 4-star level. Multinational Force Iraq went from General Casey to General Petraeus. General Petraeus was the U.S. Army 4-star at the time, who was the Multinational Force Iraq commander. He replaced General Casey, and General Petraeus was the one who led the surge. All right, so that is a significant difference in the whole character of the theater, if you will. So now we had a new commander. We have 10 more brigade combat teams, which is a significant buildup in military capability for those who aren't familiar with it. So we had all this capability, and then the clearing operations, those areas where soldiers would go and clear out wide areas around Baghdad to get rid of all the bad guys. Those clearing operations started in June of 2007. So that's when I got there. Actually, I got there in, I think it was late April, early May, something like that. But I was there to start planning the surge. Okay, so how do you plan a surge? Remember, the U.S. Army is in charge. Under Multinational Force Iraq, that's General Petraeus's 4-star command. There was Lieutenant General Odierno, a 3-star. He was the fighting general. The subordinate command to MNFI, or Multinational Force Iraq, was Multinational Corps Iraq. So that's the 3-star command. General Odierno was the 3-star commanding general of Multinational Corps Iraq. So you need to know that. So there's a 4-star command, General Petraeus leading, giving guidance, and then General Odierno doing the work with his 20 brigade combat teams. That's what the surge was. So what did they do? Okay, so what they did was they did what General Abrams back in Vietnam did in the early 70s and late 60s. A lot of people don't know that about U.S. military history. They look at the Vietnam War as just a fiasco, a disaster, wasted lives. And, that's what we think of when we think of the Vietnam War. But what a lot of people don't know, what happened after the so-called Tet Offensive. That's when the enemy did an all-out attack in the year 1968. The whole character of the Vietnam War changed. General Petraeus in Iraq knew this. Colonel Gary Crowder, my Air Force commander at the time when I was deployed forward to help planning the strategy for the surge, he knew what happened in Vietnam. So did Petraeus. They knew how to fight a counterinsurgency effectively. How did they know? Because they studied what General Abrams did, the 4-star commander in Vietnam, in 1968 through 1972. Now, that's a big deal, right? When General Abrams took over in 1968, he replaced General Westmoreland in Vietnam. And you heard about all the body counts for those who are astute in military history. All we did was, I still remember as a kid watching TV, the body count of enemy soldiers is now this. You would hear that. That was General Westmoreland. Then in comes General Abrams with a whole different perspective on how to fight these insurgents in Vietnam. And General Abrams did such a remarkable job with a drawdown in forces, because you got to remember, after 1968, the United States started losing the political will to continue the fight in Vietnam. Why Vietnam? Because we wanted to keep the Soviet Union out. We were fighting communism. But General Abrams did this with a significant drawdown in forces from 1968 to 1972. But he did it so effectively, the war was being won in ways that the news didn't want to cover it. But General Petraeus and Colonel Crowder, they knew about this, right? So when I showed up in 2007 in Iraq to start planning the surge with the other officers in the strategy division at the Air Force Command headquarters, if you will, the Combined Air Operations Center at the time. When I showed up there, the first thing they made us do was read history books. Colonel Crowder came up and read these two books. This is about the Vietnam War from 1968 to 1972. And here's some ways to employ air power in a counterinsurgency role, because that's what we're going to do. I said, oh, wait a minute. We got bombers, we got fighters, we do close air support. We can kill tanks in the open field. That's what we're designed to do. But Colonel Crowder said, no, you need to read this history about the Vietnam War. When you're done reading it, let's sit down and have a conversation, because we need to know how to support what General Petraeus is doing, because what General Petraeus in Iraq is doing is exactly what General Abrams did in 1968. Now, that may blow a lot of people's mind. Why would you do that? Why would you read history? But he was right. The way to employ air power in an insurgency role to support clearing operations and then sustain that. Once you clear out an area, you got to keep it, right? So you have to hand that area that's been cleansed of all the bad guys, in a sense. You cleaned out all the dirt. Now someone has to stay there and keep that area clean, or the dirt's going to come back in, right? The enemy's going to come back in. So you clear out an area, you hold it, right? And then you build up that area. You build up the capability, or you build up that area to ensure that this never happens again. So there was these clear, hold, and build operations. That was the strategy: clear, hold, and build. That's what Abrams did in Vietnam post, from 1968 to 1972. And that is exactly what General Petraeus was doing in the surge in Iraq. So that's how we employed air power in this clear, hold, and build operations. Now, how do you even start? Well, it starts with building relationships, Sluggo. You just can't go down. I shouldn't say go down. I should say you just can't go to another military command and walk in there and say, we're the U.S. Air Force. We got all the great ideas. We can do it. Soldiers, U.S. Army soldiers, you don't know much about air power, but let me tell you what you need to do. That's not the approach, right? It doesn't work that way. But you have to build relationships with the various commands in theater. And our challenge at the time was building relationships with General Odierno's forces. He's the 3-star commander, multinational corps Iraq. How do you build those relationships? And that was the whole secret to employing air power at that time. First, you got to build relationships and establish trust with those that you're working with. And the people we were working with were U.S. Army soldiers, right? And just by coincidence, it must have been serendipity, or maybe God was saying something to us. The U.S. Army 3rd Infantry Division from Fort Stewart, Georgia, was there at the time in 2007. U.S. Army 3rd ID, right? So this is just crazy. But they were there when I was in Iraq in 2005. The same soldiers, U.S. Army 3rd Infantry Division from Fort Stewart, was there in 2005. They redeployed home. And just by sheer luck, they redeployed back when I kind of showed up. We weren't talking to each other. We just kind of looked at each other and said, Smith, what are you doing here? So when, we started making phone calls, and we flew from the Combined Air Operations Center, which is where the Air Force was doing all its fighting. Yeah. We flew by C-130 into Baghdad, started hooking up with our air liaison officers at the U.S. Army division level. They took us to the U.S. Army Corps level, which is where Odierno, the 3-star, was. And we started talking with the colonels and the lieutenant colonels that were there. And that's how we did it. We started building trust and relationships with those guys. And then,
you know what, Taz? I just remembered something. 3rd ID was there during the shock and awe. They're the guys that they made the Thunder run into Baghdad. Perkins, Colonel Perkins. Yep. I mean, that is an incredible group of experienced soldiers, okay, during that time frame, because they're the ones that had made the march up from Kuwait and just flew into Baghdad. And of course, the big battle at the Kiffel Bridge, then the Thunder runs, into Baghdad. That was all third ID.
Yeah,
That was all
yeah,
third
they were there.
ID.
Yep. Yeah, it's crazy. One of my first officers was on the airline I'm with United. Great guy. He lives in Atlanta, but he was you mentioned third ID. I got to share this story real quick. He was a sergeant. He was a warrant officer. And was he a warrant officer? Maybe he was a sergeant, but he was in charge of a mortar platoon in 2003 with third ID. You know, so we started talking. So he was in Iraq in 2003 during the initial invasion that you mentioned, but he was in charge of a mortar platoon, and he was telling me stories, and I'm thinking, man, how did you survive all that? Because rounds were zipping past his head, and he was in these firefights, and stuff was blowing up, and they're towing a Humvee with a bunch of mortars, a trailer full of mortars, and it blew up. And I don't know how he survived. The Humvee would flip over upside down. One guy was killed. The turret gunner was killed, but he survived. He's telling me all these stories. I said, man, you guys went through so much stuff. How can you be normal after that? And he looked at me with a smile. He says, well, that's why I'm your FO. So that's why I'm your first officer. But yeah, those guys did a lot of work. Yeah. So in June of 2007, we started integrating air power to support the U.S. Army's 3rd Infantry Division at the time. Major General Lynch, U.S. Army 2-star, was the commanding general of the U.S. Army 3rd Infantry Division in June of 2007. So he was there leading his division on a clearing operation. And I knew some of the air liaison officers at the division level, and they introduced me to their planners, their soldiers. And the guy I was with, a guy named Eric Lingle, he was a captain, a U.S. Air Force captain at the time. He was a former grunt in the first Gulf War back in 1991. He was 82nd Airborne. He was a grunt. And he, when he got out of the Army, he went back to college, got his degree, and became an Air Force officer. But on his flight suit, he had a flight suit. He was wearing a flight suit. Captain Lingle was wearing a flight suit. He was a space satellite kind of guy. He was a instructor at the U.S. Air Force Weapons School, and he had a patch on his flight suit. Space guys wear flight suits, by the way. Even though the flight, satellites, you don't need a G suit.
Yeah.
But he had on his flight suit a little U.S. Army combat infantryman badge on his Velcro. He wore that when we went to Baghdad to start, planning with the air liaison officers and talking about the surge and what can we do to help you guys. Well, the soldiers at the division level saw that combat infantryman badge patch on his flight suit, and they asked him, "Sir, were you combat infantry?" He goes, "Yeah, I was 82nd Airborne in the first Gulf War." And they're like, "Oh," they just started to worship him, So if it wasn't for Captain Lingle, really, if it wasn't for him opening those doors, I mean, he established immediate trust, because in the U.S. Army, when you have a combat infantryman a badge or a medal on your chest, you get instant respect. They respect you as someone who's been in a war under fire as an infantryman. You're not in a big tank. You're not pulling the plug on a howitzer, firing rounds, 20 kilometers away. You are right up there with the enemy in the middle of a fight. So he got instant recognition and respect. And really, I think if it wasn't for Captain Lingle being there, I wonder how it would have evolved. I'm not giving myself any credit. I just happened to be the guy following Eric Lingle around as he's talking to soldiers. And then we started figuring out how to integrate air power and, different surveillance and intelligence assets that the Air Force could bring that the Army needed. So really, that's how it worked. So we started clearing out these clearing operations. General Lynch moved through the Arab Jabour district south of Baghdad. And then, all these operations started taking place. That was because we had the plus up and brigade combat teams that I mentioned earlier. Yeah. Remember, the first part of the war under General Casey, we didn't have the combat power to go out and fight. We didn't have it. All we can do is just stay on our base, do helicopter assaults on the bad guys, not really do anything really of any strategic significance in the theater.
Or we didn't offensive have in nature.
We couldn't do it.
You couldn't do anything offensive either.
But once we got those, yeah, you're right. And once we got those brigade combat teams in place, we had the plus up in capability. That's when General Petraeus was in charge, and General Odierno at the Corps, his deputy, and General Lynch. All those individuals, Odierno and Lynch retired as 4-stars, and they're just great. General Lynch was amazing, just an amazing general. But we were right there with him, and we helped his division do these clearing operations. And we also helped, let's see, in Baghdad itself, the 1st Cavalry Division was in the urban fight. They were fighting the Sadr City fight at the time. And I didn't do much with the Marines. We had good relationships with the U.S. Marines who were in the western part of Iraq, doing their thing in the Al Anwar province, which is west of Baghdad. But we focused most of our energy with those assets or those forces in and around Baghdad to do those clearing operations. That was the Iraq side of the fight back in 2007. Now, why does this matter? Because when you read some of the books that talk about the military efforts in Iraq in 2007 and 2008, there's one really good book for those history buffs by Secretary of Defense Robert Gates. He wrote a book called Duty. That's the name of it, D-U-T-Y, Duty. It's a thick book. So if you're a pilot, you're not going to get through it. You're just not going to be able to read through it. But Secretary of Defense Robert Gates wrote a really good piece on the Iraq War, and he talks in detail at the strategic level, which is where the Secretary of Defense is. They're at the strategic level of this. The soldiers on the ground at the end of a rifle, they're at the tactical level. And at the operational level, that's where the 3-stars, the 3-star general, the commanding generals, they have a focus on the entire theater, the Iraq theater being what I'm talking about. That's the operational level. So the strategic level, General, Secretary of Defense Robert Gates, he wrote a really good book called Duty. And in that book, he made the comment, and a lot of people don't know who Secretary Gates is. I think he had a PhD in history, so he knew exactly what he was talking about. So when he said that the war in Iraq, the surge, was a significant military success, he really meant that. Those words really carry a lot of weight. And when I read that in the book, I took a lot of pride in that, Sluggo, because that is a side of the war, the plus up in military forces in 2007, the so-called surge in Iraq. That was not a failure. That was a huge win for the military, and the soldiers and the airmen that I worked with. They're heroes, especially the 3rd Infantry Division guys. And fast forward almost 20 years later, here I am with my first officer getting off the plane at Washington Dulles Airport, and there's a soldier who's getting off the plane with us, and he turns around and whatever, he's making a phone call on his phone. He's wearing BDUs, and I look, and he has a 3rd Infantry Division patch on his left shoulder. So my first officer, he flew AC-130s in the war. What a great guy. But I said, hey, let's go say hi to this guy. So I went up to him and I said, 3rd ID. And he right away puts his phone down and looks. And I said, Rock of the Marne, which is the kind of the battle cry for the 3rd Infantry Division soldiers. Right away, he knew, that I knew something about the war in Iraq that a lot of people didn't know. But we had a great conversation. He was he was an enlisted soldier back in 2007 at the time. And he was a captain when I met him in Washington Dulles at the airport. And
during the surge, I mean, you guys were dropping a lot of bombs. And you told me something once that really changed the way you guys did things, and that was when you tied full motion video from Predator and Reaper drones to the guys on the ground. Talk about that for just a second.
Yeah, I don't know if it was so much the amount of ordnance. There was a time during the surge in January of 2007. There was an operation called Marne Thunderbolt.
Yes.
That was when the most ordnance was ever dropped in theater. Now, the most bombs, the most tonnage was dropped during Marne Thunderbolt, which was in January of 2007. The lead up to the Marne Thunderbolt was a lot of intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets were used to identify areas and targets. But there were two different sides of the fight that was going on. There was the fight in Iraq, and then there was the fight in Afghanistan. We had two theaters of war, if you will, within the larger theater. But the way we used ISR, or intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance, was we'd have a passive capability where we collect and listen, either with air breathing assets or overhead satellite assets. That would give us an idea of what's going on in a certain area. Then we'd zoom in a little closer with our lens. We would use moving target radar, GMTI radar is what they call the ground moving target indicator. That would give us a hit on an exact location. Then the last thing we did was use full motion video, either from Predator or Global Hawk, things like that. Why would we do it that way? Why would we go from a passive collect to an active radar pinging the ground to a full motion video? Because in that way, that's the best way at the time that we knew to use these assets, because the most valuable asset at the time, the most scarce resource, was full motion video from a Predator. Everybody wanted a Predator. They wanted a Predator drone with a video so they can see, Billy Bob on his cell phone so they can, zap them. But that takes a lot of bandwidth. A lot of electrons, if you will. So it's the most scarcest and the most resource intensive use of the capability we had. So, but a passive collect, passive where you're just listening and looking at electrons in the air, that takes very little, doesn't take a lot of bandwidth at all, but it can look over a very wide area. We're talking hundreds of miles. You can see activity across a wide spectrum, a wide area, either the electronic spectrum or the infrared spectrum, whatever. These passive sensors can give you an idea of where to put that radar to get a lot of fidelity on where to look. Now, this is a proactive way to use these assets. You hear a lot of guys talk about using radars on the ground to look at disturbed Earth. And if a bomb blows up, you follow the tracks that led up to that bomb blowing up. That is after the fact. But ISR, the way we used it, was proactive. We would use a wide area collection technique, use radar to ping certain areas to get a hit on a vehicle or something like that. Mm-hmm. The radar would give us a lot of very precise location data. And that's what we needed. We needed very precise data to focus that full motion video from a Predator, if that makes any sense. So that's the way we did it.
It makes perfect sense.
Yeah, we went from SIGINT to radar to video. That's the way we did it. And once we had those that information, then we had the ability to make a decision. Do we go against this target or do we go against that target? We have a choice. So we had decision quality information before the bomb blows up, if you will. Okay, so this passive collection that we're talking about can look over a wide area. It takes in a lot of information. The intel guys that go through the data and process it, they exploit it and disseminate it. They're really good at doing that. Very talented. There's a whole division within an Air Operations Center that does that. It's called the ISR division. Literally hundreds of guys doing this. So they distill all this data down, given the guidance from the commander. This is what we need. This is where we have to look. This is the stuff we want to go against. That's how it all works. So once you got that data, then you could drop the big bombs on the really bad guys, like what you're talking about. And in Marne Thunderbolt, the operation in January of 2007 that I was talking about earlier, Operation Marne Thunderbolt, that's when the U.S. Air Force employed the most ordnance ever within a given amount of time throughout the entire war of, from when it started in 2003 in Iraq until that time in January of 2008. So that's how that worked. So that's how we used ISR. Now, there's other techniques. There's a lot of cell phones out there now, and the cyberspace world gives us other capabilities. I wasn't really privy to that, but you can imagine that we can track cell phones now quite easily through a bunch of different means. But that's how we did it. So the full motion video from a Predator is the most expensive. Everybody likes it because when you watch something on video, you just want to keep watching it. It's like watching your favorite movie. You just want to see more and more reruns.
Yeah.
Everybody wants to glob onto the Predator. Some people call it Predator porn, as a slang way of describing you just can't get enough of your Predator. But that was that's the way we use those resources. So the bombs came, but I mentioned Iraq, but in Afghanistan, that was a highly kinetic war. What does that mean? It means we dropped a lot of ordnance, a lot of bombs in Afghanistan. When you compare that to Iraq, the war in Afghanistan was very highly kinetic because it was a wide open space. We didn't have the resources that we did. We didn't have the plus up in military capability like we did in Iraq. So we used a lot more ordnance in Afghanistan. There was a very highly kinetic nature of war in that theater versus the Iraqi theater. It was more of a, let's just capture them and put them in jail. Pretty much that,
Hey,
but in Martin Thunderbolt, we did drop a lot of ordnance in Iraq. You're right. Yeah.
I got another question for you, brother.
Yeah.
Okay. Everybody is saying, why did we bomb Iran a couple weekends ago? They haven't done anything to us. Okay. You and I know differently.
Yeah.
Talk to, the Iranian involvement, particularly Qassem Soleimani during this same time period. A lot of the things that the Iranian militia, the Quds forces and Soleimani were doing at the same time that we're doing this.
Well, I wasn't targeting high value targets. The special forces guys in theaters, in the theater, the Delta Force guys, the SEALs, those guys were going after the high value targets. You mentioned Soleimani. We didn't do that. We focused on the conventional forces. Yeah. Now, what does that mean? Well, from my perspective, in 2005, the attacks on the Baghdad International Airport in 2005, they were happening, but they were not very accurate. These mortar rounds and rocket rounds that were fired from maybe 10 or 20 kilometers away, they didn't have a lot of precision in 2005. But in 2007, things were a lot different. Now they were able to hit parking lots with the same rockets, and the technology they were using was Iranian ballistic tables. We captured some Iranian ballistic tables that the bad guys were using to, refine their ability to aim these weapons. So that was my perspective. And these weapons were coming from Iran. They were being built in Iran. We had all the intelligence on the weapons being produced in Iran at the time. We knew when the customer would place the order for the weapon. We knew when the weapon would be developed by factories or production facilities within the state of Iran. We knew when those weapons would be shipped to the training centers. We knew when the customers would show up with their instructors at the training centers to learn how to use these weapons. And the weapons we're talking about is roadside bombs, very sophisticated roadside bombs.
Very sophisticated.
Not just a hand grenade blown up on the side of the road. These were very sophisticated roadside weapons. We knew when those training classes would take place, and we knew when the customers would cross the border to go back into Afghanistan or go back into Iraq. We had all that intelligence, but we couldn't go into Iran and go after these guys because Iran was considered off limits. It was at the time, a so-called neutral country in the fight. They weren't, officially, identified as such, which I knew at the time, and everyone knew that this war would go on forever unless we went into Iran and took it out. Now, that's Iranian militias have been wreaking havoc upon the world since 1979 when they took over the U.S. Embassy in Tehran, right? When they kicked out the Shah.
Yeah.
Now, that's been going on for almost 50 years, Sluggo. The Beirut bombing, the U.S. Marine barracks in Beirut in the early 1980s.
Hezbollah.
The bombings in Lebanon, all these were Iranian influenced, attacks. The Khobar Tower bombing in Saudi Arabia. I think one of the fighter squadrons from Eglin Air Force Base was there. In fact, I know they were. I was talking to some of the guys that survived the bombing. I flew with some of them. Yeah. They were deliberately attacked by an Iranian, truck that was full of explosives, and it took out half the building.
Yeah.
So this was in the 90s, the early 90s when this happened. So these Iranian attacks have been going on forever. But I know from my experience in 07, in 2007 and 2008 at the Combined Air Operations Center, we had the intelligence. We just couldn't go after them in the state of Iran, not with conventional force capability.
Yeah.
But when I heard the global strike on those on the nuclear plants in Iran, what was it, last week, 2 weeks ago?
Yeah.
I said to myself, finally, we're calling out the bad guys for what they've been doing to us, blowing off soldiers' arms, using these roadside bombs that were killing us. Finally, we're going after them. Now, we went after these guys once they crossed the border. Once they were in Afghanistan and Iraq, they met the rules of engagement, and we can engage them as the enemy. But we couldn't go into Iran, not with the capabilities we had. But we did have the capabilities to easily go into Iran and take those guys out a long time ago. We just didn't have the political will. And the U.S. Army soldiers and Marines that were in the fight, they paid the price for the lack of political will. So it's really, it was frustrating because at our level, we couldn't, we didn't have the authority to go after these guys. And we knew this fight was going to go on forever. And it was really a kind of, it was a shame. It was actually a shame. But none of those soldiers' lives were wasted. None of the spilled blood was spilled in vain. I think now, finally, Iran, it has to go away because they've been killing us for years. And that government, in my opinion, I'm not the strategic thinker here, but they will continue to kill us as much as they can. If your next door neighbor in your neighborhood said, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to kill you, I want to kill you, and they start loading up all these weapons and they keep threatening you that they're going to kill you, what are you going to do about it? You got to do something. You got to go after them before they try to kill you. And that's kind of what's happening right now. They've been threatening the United States. They've been threatening Israel, death to Israel, death to America. And that the Iranian parliament was just doing that last week. I don't know if you saw that on the news.
I did. And did you see they finally put a fatwa out, I think it was Saturday, against Trump and Netanyahu. They finally said, what do they call him? An enemy to God or something like that, And so
how do you,
they have this religious thing where they say, you're an enemy to God, we're going to come after you. Okay.
Yeah.
And of course now with who knows who's inside our borders, because of the last administration, they're capturing Iranian groups in the United States right now. And so you've got to take that fatwa at face value.
Yeah.
And
they mean it.
They mean it exactly, with the knowledge, Taz, that there may be people here already, like in, I don't know, Minneapolis, who are just waiting for a phone call to say, okay, let's go find Trump at one of his things, and he's, Trump kind of walks around, President Trump walks around and greets people, and he's kind of open, he's very much wants to be amongst everybody. All right. And that can be very dangerous when you have a whole country that says, hey, death to you, death to Netanyahu. And, oh, by the way, we've got all these people that we just captured in the United States that were Iranian. Yeah. One guy was a sniper. One guy was a trained sniper, Taz. And you're like going, holy smokes, why are we playing with these people?
Yeah.
That's a whole other discussion though, but
but they mean business,
They do.
They mean business. But finally, we went into Iran and attacked them,
Yeah.
That gave me a sense of relief because I knew the war would go on forever. When I was there in 2007 and 2008, I redeployed back home knowing that. And it's just not a good feeling. It's not like you just, won victory in World War II and you're on a Liberty ship going back home to New York City after the war is done. The war is done. The enemy has been defeated. But when you come back from a war like that, where you get off the plane in Baltimore and you go back home, it's just, it wasn't a very good, it was not good. We shouldn't put our soldiers' lives at risk like that. It's wrong. It's just totally wrong. We had so much combat capability at the time when I was there in the Combined Air Operations Center. I'm telling you, we had so much combat capability that we didn't use because we didn't want to use it. People were happy. Well, I shouldn't say happy, but there were a lot of people making a lot of money off that war. And
Yeah.
it was a gravy train that we shouldn't do that. If we're going to use our military, hit them hard, win the war as quickly as possible, use as much military capability as you have available. We had that, but we're just saluting smartly and carrying on the orders of what we're told to do.
Yeah.
All the generals that I worked with in the Air Force, they were amazing people. General North was awesome. I mean, he's a warfighter, but we all knew we can't go into that country. We're going to fight the fight here with what we have. And we did the best we could, given the resources we had at the time. But that was that. But the surge in Iraq from 2007 and 2008, that was quite a huge military victory. A lot of people don't know that. But I hope history will tell the truth about what really happened there, because we just need to know the truth. Was it a failure? General Secretary of Defense Robert Gates didn't think so. He thought it was a brilliant military victory. Both sides of the political aisle, according to what they said in his book, they gave witness to the fact. They testified that that was a win. I hand it to George W. Bush. That was a brilliant move on his part, and with General Petraeus leading the forces in Iraq.
Yeah,
but I just want to hear the truth.
And people don't understand too. How brilliant some of these people are, like Odiniero. People don't know 4-star General Petraeus is actually Dr. General 4-star Petraeus.
Yeah.
He's got a doctorate in international relations. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. They're smart.
Really smart guys. So,
yeah.
Hey, brother, I know you need to leave. Okay.
It's all right. Hey, no worries.
All right.
Okay.
No,
I need to catch up with my wife.
Yeah. Here's what we'll do. Okay. We'll schedule again, and let's talk about the airway system and the infrastructure here in the United States. Okay.
Yeah. The National Airspace System. That's a whole topic.
Yeah. I know.
That's a good hour.
Yeah. And so
we need to build.
Yeah. So later in the week when you're home or something like that, let's do that. Okay.
Yeah.
And we'll just
schedule
another meeting. All right.
All right, brother. This was about a little over an hour. It was good.
Hour and a half.
Okay.
Hour
Perfect.
and a half. Hour and 37 minutes. Okay. Is what it's, on my little clock up here. So
when I saw you block out 2 hours, I'm thinking there's no way it's not going to last that long. How can anybody, but here we are.
Oh, dude, look at this. We've been an hour and a half, and you're telling me we got another hour to talk about the airway system. Okay.
Oh, easily.
Okay.
Easily an hour,
Yeah. I've had a lot of people that have come on the show, Taz, that have said, I don't know if I can do this in 2 hours, and then we end up going like at 2 hours and 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Once it's all about asking the right questions. That's what I've learned about doing this. It's all about asking the right questions. Okay, brother?
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, that accident, that Reagan midair accident in January.
I want to talk about that.
That is going to change everything. Well, maybe it's going to take another one, but there's certain events that happen in aviation history that really is the tipping point to a new direction. And there's several touch points throughout the last 70 years that we can talk about.
But that one opened everybody's eyes.
Yeah. Yeah.
That one really did.
Yeah.
Anyway, Taz, hey, it's great to have you on, brother, as always.
Thanks,
you and I could sit and talk for hours, and we have. But
Roger.
All the best to Terry, and
Thanks.
Thanks for being on the Lessons from the Cockpit show today, brother. All right.
Thanks, Sluggo. Take care. Say hi to Val. Adios.
I will. Folks, I really hope you enjoyed this episode. Okay. Taz is probably one of the smartest people I've ever worked with in so many different ways. He is truly a joint warfighter. And there's some stories that we're going to get into when we interview him again, because he wants to talk about things that are going on with the infrastructure for aviation here in the United States and how it's causing problems. But he's got some other really incredible stories of things that happened during the surge that he was personally involved with. This episode is brought to you by Wall Pilot, custom aviation art for the walls of your home, office, or hangar. 168 ready to print, 4, 6, 8 foot vinyl decals that you can peel off and stick on your wall, like my KC-135 above me. If you don't see something in the ready to print, let us do a custom print for you. Fill out the custom form. We can do your favorite airplane with your unit, your name on it, tail number, even weapons load if it's one of the modern jets. And these truly are remarkable when you look at them. Our printer does an outstanding job because you can read the stenciling on some of the missiles on these, even on these 4-footers. So go to wallpilot.com and take a look through all of our prints. Also, Valorous TV. Please, please, folks, go to their YouTube channel. That's where I go. They have great movies, documentaries, interviews with law enforcement, military, and first responders that you will absolutely love. And I can't say enough good things about Valorous TV because it is the place for heroes, the home for heroes. So, Valorous TV on YouTube. Folks, I really appreciate you coming by and listening and downloading these episodes. Please become a member of the All Ranks Club. I have my link down there. That's my Patreon channel. Membership for a month at the designated driver or the by the bar. You get Q&A session with me, one-on-one. I just had a Zoom meeting with a new member last week. We also have these stickers that we've created, and you get one every month. We're working on the next 15. These are smaller versions, 7-inch versions of the big one that you see here. They go on water bottles, computers, or wherever you want to place one of these things. They are, in fact, waterproof. Mine has been on my water bottle for over a year and has not come off. So those of you that join my Patreon All Ranks Club, that's what you get. We're starting an All Ranks Club clothing company using some of the drawings that I've done and some of the historical nose art on the shirts. If you want to just send a contribution to the show to keep us going, keep the fuel tanks up, then my Venmo is also below, and just contribute however much you want. Again, thank you for coming by the Lessons from the Cockpit show. We are going to have TAZZ on again because I really want to talk to him about the ancient infrastructure that we have in the Federal Aviation Administration and this airline and commercial structure throughout the entire United States. It needs a lot of help. The helicopter and airliner incident over the Potomac is a case in point. And TAZZ is going to tell us about that because he flies for major airlines now. So, folks, look forward to episode number 14. I will be at Oshkosh all next week, the 21st through the 27th, with the Gail Halverson Candy Bomber Foundation. Our booth is 4109. It is in Hangar D. And then on Thursday, the Berlin Airlift Historical Foundation C-54 Skymaster, just like Colonel Gail Halverson flew, will also be on the ramp. I will be there signing books. I have a 10-pack of those stickers that I talked about that are going to be with me also, and a few other cool things. So come by, find me at Oshkosh all next week, 21st through the 27th, the entire show. Thanks again, folks, for tuning in and downloading this episode, and look forward to talking to you once again on the Lessons from the Cockpit show.